Okay. Okay, and I push the little button. And I will call the Stormwater Utility Board meeting to order. And the first, you don't put on here, roll call.
No, I've taken that off because because we're on Zoom, I have the participants up and it's also recorded. So I will just announce who's here.
Okay, announce who's here. I think I have to legally at least have you call the roll or tell us
Yep.
that we have a quorum.
Yep. In attendance, I have West, Knorr, Giebert, Potter, Bachhuber. Missing are Cook and Sullivan. We have a quorum.
Okay. Then the first item is the minutes from November 17th, 2021. Do we have a motion for approval?
I'll move approval, John.
This is Warren, I'll second it.
Okay, any changes, comments, or whatever? Hearing none, all in favor, please say aye.
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 Okay, minutes
Probably-
opposed.
Do I need to
Abstention?
abstain?
You can abstain.
I wasn't there, so is that the correct thing to do?
That's the correct thing to do.
And that's what I'm doing.
Okay. So minutes are approved. Next item is the Graber Pond Elevation Control Study. 19120B Amendment Number 9 to agreement. Okay, Rich, you've got to explain this.
I'm
Or
actually going to let Eric explain this.
Okay,
This is an amendment to the contract that we've been dealing with MSA on while we try to sort through the outfall control structure and then the downstream properties to try to make sure that if we have the control structure, that we can maintain the water going down the stream. So part of that's the elevation and part of it's extending it beyond just the weir.
okay.
That's a pretty good synopsis, Susan. MSA is expanding their modeling to include changes which will be caused by Bell Farms and by the proposed Tribeca diversion project.
Mhm.
And then also to look at the conveyance beneath Misty Valley Road. This is all to manage flood issues essentially and related to the outlet elevation that we're going to provide for Graber Pond, which we've gone back and forth with quite a few times now. So we asked MSA to provide this amendment and it went through Water Resources last month and they recommended approval. And Eric Thompson is here to help flesh this out. There have also been some recent conversations with DNR, which may lead to another task that needs to be done here. But Eric Thompson, why don't you take it away, please?
Sure, thanks. So I think you can kind of boil down where we're at as coming from 4 different directions. The first one is if you refer back to the last time we were in front of the board or in front of the commission, one of the things we observed was really any improvement to the outlet at Graber Pond is going to result in a bottleneck at the next downstream crossing, which is going to potentially raise flood elevations there. And so we need to evaluate, all right, how do we sort of cascade these increases in flows downstream. So that's number one. Number two is earlier on, the flood elevation, or rather the outlet of the flood outlet device was going to be at elevation 904. And then that has subsequently changed. And now we're looking at potentially having it be as low as 902. So that requires some different hydraulic analyses. And then the third item is that because the flood elevation outlet structure will be lower, the DNR is changing their approach to how this is going to be permitted, which is sort of the last thing that Eric Sorensen brought up, in that they now want to have a formal wetland delineation in the area of disturbance. And then they're asking for something called a floristic quality study for the entire perimeter of the pond to get a sense of, how is the changing outlet going to potentially affect the vegetation down there. And then the fourth thing, which, as Eric also pointed out, is we're going to be looking at what are the effects of some of the proposed developments in the watershed, the subdivision that he talked about, plus the Tribeca diversion. What you're looking at on the screen right now is the contract amendment that we had put together, I guess it was early in November, prior to having talked to the DNR. And the bottom line of this amendment is $16,065. And that actually reflects a sort of a net amendment, because there are some tasks in our current contract which we haven't done, and because of the scope change, we simply won't do. And so there's a credit of $5,000 on there. Now, unfortunately, because of the issues with the additional permitting, the floristic quality assessment, and the wetland delineation, we're actually looking at about a $5,100 add-on. So if we were to go forward from today and hopefully not have any other sort of curveballs thrown into us, the request to the SWUB today would be $16,065 for this scope, plus another $5,100 for the wetland related activities.
Okay, so it's a total of 21.
21,165 to be precise.
Okay, explain the DNR floristic stuff a little better for me.
Well, I don't necessarily know the floristic stuff, because, to be perfectly honest, it's the first time I've heard of that requirement.
Okay,
But Jeff, being the wetland specialist, assures me that this happens on occasion. But it all has to do with the fact that, there's been some historic evidence as to the elevation of the outlet being up here, and I'm kind of just sort of waving my hand around, but now it's going to be lowered. And so the thought is, well, if it's going to be, substantially historically different, then the DNR, I think, harbors some concerns that there's going to be vegetation change and things like that. And they want to have that quantified. Jeff is still of the mindset that it's going to be a general permit as opposed to an individual permit. And so the permitting process should be relatively painless. But nonetheless, DNR wants to check their boxes, and the floristic assessment and the wetland delineation are two of the boxes that need to be checked.
okay, I haven't been around there enough to know if it's got anything unusual there, but don't kettle ponds dry up every so often, and hasn't this one?
That is the theory behind it. Yes, that's kind of a definition of a kettle pond. This one, with climate change and with development, I think the frequency of it staying full and not drying out completely has increased, or rather the frequency of it drying out has decreased. A number of years ago, the Water Resources Commission hired another consultant to do a study of it, and part of the findings of that study we have been using for the basis for this design. That study did indicate that there's a fairly high seepage rate, but again, with climate change and changing runoff conditions because of development, whether or not that seepage rate is able to sort of overcome and compensate for the additional runoff, I don't know. I think in a extended drought, certainly it would dry out. I think it would probably dry out comparatively quickly, but what's the frequency of that? I'm not prepared to say.
We've had a pretty dry year this year. I don't know. I haven't seen it. Richard, have you been out there and looked at it?
It's gone down a lot. It's low.
But it hasn't dried up at all.
I was out there about 2 to 3 weeks ago, and there's standing water, but much receded from the
Right.
perimeter. That you can see where it's just mud flats around the perimeter.
Yeah, we're probably about 10 inches below normal for the year.
Mhm.
I got a couple questions.
Yes.
I think for Eric Thompson. So you're gonna do a formal field wetland delineation? Is that one that on the perimeter of the pond? Is that correct?
It's not the entire perimeter, it's just within the area of construction disturbance.
Oh, okay, okay. And the second question is, will, if all goes as written up now, no more curveballs, as you say, is the deliverable from this contract then a construction document for bidding purposes? Is that?
Yes, for the outlet structure and for the roadway crossing at Misty Valley Road, yes.
Okay. And then third question, sorry, I got one more, and I wasn't at the Water Resource Commission meeting, sorry. This got discussed, I know, last month. The outlet structure elevation being dropped by, I think, 2 feet, if I remember correctly now. What was the 30-second? I know it's probably took by probably 3 hours of discussion, but what was the 30-second path that led to that conclusion?
The hope is to provide 1 foot of freeboard to National Electrostatics.
Okay. And is this going to
Define freeboard for me, please.
That's the difference between the estimated peak flood elevation and the lowest flood damage elevation of the nearby structure.
Okay.
So there'll be a spillway at the elevation 1 foot below, emergency spillway a foot below the damaged elevation for
No,
electrostatics?
the hope would be that the peak flood elevation under normal operating conditions would just be maintained a foot below National Electrostatics floor. The configuration of the structure is likely to have a runout elevation of 902 in sort of its fully open condition, but there will be some stop logs on it with the idea that it will normally be kept partially closed, so the water would have to get to some elevation higher than that. But if there's a concern that the water is up and staying up and there's a large flood event or something anticipated in the future, then city staff could go out there, remove those stop logs and lower it down in anticipation of needing that extra storage. There are some scenarios that we've got to evaluate, and Eric Sorensen at the city has kind of got some thoughts in mind, and so our contract scope is kind of following what his vision for this is.
Well, your rainfall, this is Warren, your rainfall runoff model will help us with that too, to find out how frequently we might have flooding. Right?
I'm sorry, was that directed to me?
Yeah, Derek Thompson. So
Yeah,
the rainfall
right.
runoff model will help us decide how frequently we may have to use that extra storage to control releases.
Yeah, I'm sure, Jim, to kind of circle back to your original question, dealing with these landlocked basins, the challenge is always what's the starting condition when you get this storm event. So we'll do an analysis. Well, let's assume all the stop logs are out. We get event XYZ. Let's assume 1 stop log's in. We get an event XYZ. Another stop logs in an event XYZ. You can kind of see where I'm going with that. And there'll be some sort of an envelope of, well, this is what happens if the water level's here, and here, which then should give the city some education as to, well, if we're anticipating wet weather coming up or it's this late into the season and we're not seeing the water levels go down, we should make an adjustment. All of that, of course, is going to be some sort of part of the permitting for this, some sort of an operation plan for the outlet structure, which the DNR will have some say, and I'm sure that some of the other constituents in the city, namely the Friends of Pheasant Branch, will probably have some input on as well.
And along that line, during the discussion at the Water Resource meeting where this got developed, and this is a question I think for Warren or Eric Sorensen or Ken Potter, was there any input or comment from Pheasant Branch folks on that change?
Yes. I mean, it's all based on this, where are we going to set the top of the pond, Jim?
Yep.
And it'd be nice if we could manage this actively, but my thought was, that it would be a passively managed thing, and we would set this top elevation based on providing that freeboard. MSA had come with a design at 904.0, which is what the Friends had requested essentially.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, the issue is that if you take a 100-year storm through the pond with that elevation, they could not physically build an outlet with enough capacity to pass the flow without flooding National Electrostatic.
National Electrics.
So
Okay.
I don't think there's any, you know, we're not going to end up maintaining this at 902. I think you might end up 903 1/4, something more in that range.
Okay. Thank you.
I have one more question for Eric on the modeling. So the modeling, are you going to look at conditions before Bell Farm development and afterwards to see what the difference is?
The short answer is yes. The longer answer is within reason, given what information we can get from the developer. So I kind of listened in on their presentation at the last meeting, and it didn't sound like they had their design fully fleshed out, and they had, you know, conceptual ideas of having infiltration facilities and distributed stormwater management facilities that were, again, you know, really conceptual. It wasn't like they had a specific geometry and a specific performance in mind. But to the best of our ability to duplicate that, yes, we will include that in the model.
And you'll have a before model then, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, we to
We
a
do
degree have that
you know,
now.
current conditions.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a complex development, so I think that would be very hard to model.
But
Okay.
it's safe to say, Eric, and this is because the scope of work we're talking about here, the more detailed modeling will occur by the developer when the development's being proposed as, you know, for review by the Water Resource Group, right? I mean, you're not, I don't believe, and this is not expected, that you would get into the nuances of each and every BMP that they're putting in or proposing to put in on that site.
No, we wouldn't do that at this stage. But
No,
you know,
it wouldn't.
when things are done, I mean, our model will be done, and there isn't any reason, depending upon the platform that they're using, that they couldn't take it and add it to theirs.
Right, or vice versa. Yeah.
Right.
I think the hope is, Jim, that MSA will be able to use a, you know, complete or very close to complete model from Bell Farms.
Okay, they're probably using a, well, I shouldn't suppose that's nuanced stuff. Move to approve.
Okay, do we have a second?
This war, I'll second it.
Jim,
Okay,
I have a
I have-
question, Don.
Yeah. yes, go ahead, Don.
We just moved to approve the 16,065. Are we going to then at next month's meeting see this added $5,000, or can we take care of that now and have it done with it? The way I understood it, it was going to be ultimately $21,065, not $16,065.
I would accept a friendly amendment if that can be done and if that makes sense.
Well, I think it could be done. You'd have
Yeah.
to modify the scope on this document as well to include that. I mean, right now it's sort of like a, yeah, well, okay, we took out the 5,000, but no, we're gonna have to put it back in. So I think we need the scope redefined in this document as well to include that and get it at the 21,000, and maybe we could approve it subject to those modifications being made, just to move it along.
That's a good idea. I just want to ask Eric Sorensen if Finance Department, the city would have any objections.
I think you can probably approve for a, you know, what's presented to you, and then put a, you know, a ceiling of the extra $5,100 for a specific scope of work, pending staff working that out with MSA.
yeah, I think that's the approach I would recommend as well. We can modify this. This wouldn't go to the council or finance until probably the 18th of January. So there's plenty of time to work out these details if we make the motion properly.
Okay, figure out a motion that would be proper for the Finance Committee and Bill Burns.
I don't know that they'll know the difference. But if we modify this document per the newest information, this new document with that new information, excuse me, we'll just go to finance and
Okay.
council. I don't think we're pulling any radar, anybody's wool over the eyes for any of
Okay, I
that.
think,
So,
I
so
just
the
think that makes
motion,
more sense than sitting here and doing it now and then a month later doing it again.
yeah, I don't want to do this twice. So the motion is to approve the contract with, as written, with a contingency of an additional not to exceed $5,100 to conduct this is the floral study we're talking about,
Wetland delineation and floristic quality study.
those two things as negotiated by staff.
Okay,
Can we live with that?
that sounds fine.
Okay, so Susan, you're willing to accept that amendment then?
Yes, I just don't want to have to fight with Mark Sullivan at council.
No, can't avoid that, sorry. That's why you get paid the big bucks, Susan.
Yeah, right.
So I have Bachhuber with the first
Yeah,
and Warren with the second. Does that stand?
Yes,
Okay, then all in favor, please say aye.
aye.
I,
Opposed? Anyone opposed? No. Okay. Motion carried unanimously.
Okay, thank you.
What's the next item?
Thanks, Eric.
Thank you, Eric.
Thanks, Eric.
Rich, I need the next item on the screen.
I know I was making some notes before I
Okay,
mucked it all up.
It's the burst
Yep,
survey
it's
amendment.
the amendment for the drainage way for some additional work that they ended up doing by nature of how the project went. And they're asking for $2,408.74 in addition.
So the work's been done, Richard?
Yes, they had performed the work and then, asked for a little extra money through the process of it. And we felt that they had provided extra work that wasn't in the initial scope due to a, a fiber optic line that was buried that took some more research and effort that we weren't really aware of at the time that they started the work.
And
Okay.
I'll add to, Michelle Burse is here, Jim, but yeah, the fiber optic line hadn't been marked by Muffin, which is some kind of a UW concern, and of course it's in the way. They had to go out and take some more field trips to survey some more, and since then the project has kind of been stuck while we're trying to negotiate between the railroad and the fiber optic operator as to who's going to pay to move this thing out of the way. But we think these additional costs are perfectly reasonable.
And you had discussions at the time that this fiber optic was discovered, that this is going to be a change in scope.
It was certainly in my mind, yes. I mean, it's not a surprise to me.
Okay.
okay. Who was the fiber optic company?
It's the Muffin line. It's a consortium and a connection for UW Health.
Oh, it's
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
The Muffin line.
it's an
Okay.
acronym, but I don't know what it means.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I'd heard it before, but I wasn't sure. Okay. Any other questions? Do we have a motion?
I'll make a motion for approval.
A second?
Don, I'll second.
Okay. Any further discussion? Not all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing no one is opposed, motion carries unanimously. And we need a motion to adjourn.
I got 3 minutes here. Quick question. What part of the Greenway here, I think I read was west of Park Street? Is there a part that's, I can't picture where it is.
This line, the drainage way runs from almost Park Street over by Tiedemann Pond,
Yeah.
within the railroad right away. And then right before you get to Stonefield, is it a boulevard, Rich? I'm not sure. It turns to the north, crosses the tracks, and then it crosses Stonefield, few hundred feet north of the tracks, and then it continues east towards City of Madison. So there's a section of this drainage way that's east of Stonefield that first surveyed and developed preliminary plans for and all that kind of stuff. And we decided that the work necessary is limited enough that we can probably do it ourselves with our own forces. So that's
Okay.
actually a small decrease in their scope, which has been accounted for, but
Okay,
they had done the bulk of the work for that.
thank you.
Okay. Then do we have a motion to adjourn?
I'll move.
Or I will just state we are adjourned.
Yeah, you just,
Good enough.
Good
Okay,
enough.
And this is a first, we're done right on time.
yes. Now it's your turn, Warren.
Yes, unbelievable.
all right, we gotta leave here though, right?
No,
No.
we can stay right here, but I have to stop recording and then hand it over to Eric, and then we can just start up again.
All right, I am leaving.